The fateful night. The sky was overcast, with swirling clouds signaling an impending storm. From the first-class cabin window, Lucas Vance looked down at the trail of lights below. New York streets fading into the distance as the plane carried him to his next destination on his endless business journey. For him, every flight wasn't an adventure. It was simply another part of his jam-packed schedule, a series of endless meetings with financial partners, where each decision could change the fate of hundreds of millions of dollars. Beside him, Charlotte Charlie Reed silently double-checked documents on her iPad. Having been Lucas's assistant for more than 3 years, she knew the demands and pressure of his job better than anyone. Lucas was the kind of man who never let personal emotions interfere with his work, always cold, logical, and precise to the point of being almost indifferent. But that very trait made him one of the most talented and formidable CEOs in the financial world. "Mr. Vance, I've rearranged the schedule for the board meeting. They'll be expecting us tomorrow morning, right after we land," Charlie reported, her voice calm but firm. Lucas merely nodded, his eyes still fixed on his phone. "Good. Make sure we don't waste any time." She gave a slight smile, an expression he probably wouldn't notice. Charlie had grown used to Lucas's way of working. Absolute efficiency, no small talk, never wasting a second on anything he deemed unnecessary. She respected that, but sometimes she couldn't help but wonder if there was anything that could break through the cold shell around him. The flight was passing smoothly until the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to bad weather and an unexpected storm ahead, we are forced to make an emergency landing at the nearest town. We apologize for any inconvenience." Charlie glanced at Lucas, catching a slight frown on his face. No one liked sudden changes, especially Lucas Vance, who controlled everything in his life. But this time, there was nothing they could do but accept it. As they stepped off the plane, a gust of wind hit them, carrying the damp chill of the approaching storm. This small town didn't have a real international airport, just a small runway for domestic flights. Rain began to fall in steady drizzles, adding to the heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Charlie tightened her coat, looking around at the few scattered low buildings, mostly homes and small shops. She turned to Lucas. "Looks like we'll have to find somewhere to stay for the night." He nodded, pulling out his phone to call his other assistant to figure out how to proceed with their journey. But with the current weather, they couldn't hire a private jet or travel by any other means. The storm was expected to last until the next morning. The only hotel in town was a small 2-story building, neither luxurious nor convenient like the places Lucas usually stayed. But in this situation, there was no other option. "Do you have any rooms available?" Lucas asked the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied-back hair and a polite smile. "Sorry, sir, we only have one room left," she replied, her gaze lingering on the two of them with some hesitation. Charlie glanced at Lucas, knowing he wouldn't be pleased, but there was nowhere else to go, and standing out in the middle of a storm in a strange town was definitely not a viable option. "We'll take the room," she spoke up before Lucas could protest. He glanced at her but said nothing, simply handing over his credit card to pay. The room was simple, with only one large bed, an old armchair, and a window overlooking the quiet street outside. The warm yellow light created a soft, calming atmosphere, but it also made the unavoidable closeness between the two of them even more apparent. Charlie removed her coat, hanging it up, then turned to Lucas. "I'll sleep on the chair." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to do that." "I don't need to share a bed with my boss," she replied, half joking, half serious. He stared at her for a moment, then removed his coat and draped it over the back of the chair. "Do whatever you want." They decided to order food from the small restaurant near the hotel. As they sat down to dinner, Charlie realized something interesting for the first time. This was a rare occasion when she and Lucas weren't in a work environment. There were no meeting rooms, no financial reports, just the two of them sitting in a small room where no one knew who they were. "So, outside of work, do you have any hobbies?" she asked, leaning back in her chair, her voice laced with curiosity. Lucas looked up, as if he wasn't used to such questions. "Hobbies? Do you read, watch movies, or do anything to relax?" He paused for a moment, then shrugged. "I like chess." Charlie raised an eyebrow. "Really?" I wouldn't have guessed. Lucas gave a rare, faint smile. Chess is a strategic game. I like how it forces you to think several moves ahead of your opponent. Do you see life as a game of chess? She asked, half teasing, half serious. He paused, his gaze darkening slightly. Sometimes, for some reason, his answer caused a stir in Charlie's heart. In that brief moment, she didn't see the cold CEO anymore. She saw a man carrying burdens and secrets. The atmosphere between them slowly shifted. The storm raged outside, but inside, another storm was silently brewing. A tension hung in the air, a nameless feeling that both of them tried to ignore, but couldn't deny. When their eyes met, Charlie felt the restraint in Lucas's gaze, and in that brief moment, she knew she wasn't the only one struggling with her emotions. And then, no one could resist the storm any longer. When Lucas's lips met hers, all Charlie knew was that tonight, all rules were broken. Life can be overwhelming, but here, we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. The cold silence. Charlie woke up as the morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow over the small hotel room. She moved slightly, sensing the emptiness beside her. A cold chill brushed against her bare skin under the thin blanket, and then she realized Lucas was no longer there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she opened her eyes and looked to the side. The bed was left with only traces of him, a corner of the blanket displaced, the warmth gone cold, leaving nothing but emptiness, no goodbye, no message, no explanation. He was gone. Charlie sat up, wrapping the blanket around her body, trying to force herself to stay calm. Maybe she shouldn't be surprised. They had shared a moment of vulnerability, swept up in a storm of emotions and desires. But that meant nothing, especially not to Lucas. He wasn't the kind of man who got involved in feelings, and she shouldn't have expected anything else. But despite telling herself that, a sharp ache quietly crept into her chest. She got out of bed, picking up the clothes scattered on the floor, trying to regain her usual composure. Looking at herself in the mirror, she gave a wry smile. What had she been expecting? A breakfast in bed? A soft glance? A word saying that last night meant something? She shook her head, immediately extinguishing the foolish thought. Lucas Vance wasn't that kind of man, and she wasn't a girl living in a dream. The business trip ended, and they returned to New York that very morning. Not a word was mentioned about what had happened. No sign that Lucas remembered that night. He resumed his work with the same precision and coldness as always, as if nothing had changed. Meetings continued to start on time. Calls were still short and efficient. Not a hesitant glance, not a lingering look. Lucas behaved as if that night had never happened, and Charlie tried to do the same. She returned to her duties, sticking closely to his schedule, handling important matters, arranging meetings, reviewing documents. But every time she stepped into Lucas's office, every time they stood together in the same space, she felt something being suppressed. She wasn't sure what it was. Was it confusion, regret, or just his deliberate indifference? But whatever it was, it made her feel suffocated. Could he really forget everything that easily? Every time her gaze unconsciously searched for him, she was met with nothing but absolute distance. Over the past few days, she had waited for a sign, an explanation, or at least a hint of wavering in him. But Lucas remained as cold as ever, as if nothing had happened. She had once thought she understood Lucas Vance, but now she wasn't so sure. A week after returning from the business trip, Charlie walked into Lucas's office with a stack of reports in her hands. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Lucas was standing by the window, looking down at the bustling New York streets below. His back was as strong and calm as always, but something in the air between them had changed. She took a deep breath, then set the reports down on the desk. Here's the financial report for the last quarter. I've reviewed the investments and— Leave it, he cut her off, not bothering to turn and look at her. Charlie frowned. She could tolerate his silence, but she couldn't stand the coldness, as if she didn't even exist. She crossed her arms, leaning against the desk, her voice calm but laced with frustration. Lucas, if you're going to pretend like nothing happened, at least do it more convincingly. This time he turned to face her. His sharp blue eyes were as intense as always, but for a moment, something flickered in them. Annoyance? Caution? What are you talking about? His voice was low, emotionless. Charlie let out a dry laugh. Don't pretend, Lucas. We both know exactly what I'm talking about. A long silence stretched between them, their eyes locked, neither willing to back down. Finally, Lucas spoke, his voice cold and distant. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. Charlie felt her chest tighten for a moment, but she quickly hid her emotions. She had anticipated this response. She nodded slowly, giving a wry smile. I see. Lucas continued to look at her, but this time, there was something in his gaze that kept her from leaving immediately. She took a deep breath, then said bluntly, You know, Lucas, I don't regret that night, but I regret thinking that it meant anything to you. She saw a flicker in his eyes, but just as quickly, it was replaced by the same coldness as before. We should get back to work, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Charlie gave a faint, bitter smile. Right. Work. She turned to leave, but just as her hand reached the door handle, Lucas's voice came from behind her. Charlie. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. But when she turned around, all she saw was a man trying to keep his distance, trying to bury all his emotions. He didn't say anything else, and she understood. Between them, it was all over. At least that's what she thought at that moment, a secret that cannot be kept. 2 months had passed since that night. Charlie's life seemed unchanged on the outside, but deep inside she knew something was happening. At first it was just unexplained fatigue. She often felt drained after work, sometimes dizzy as she stepped out of the elevator. The coffee, which had always kept her awake each morning, now made her nauseous every time she caught a whiff of it. At first she thought she was just overworking. But then other signs began to appear. Dizziness, increased sensitivity, and above all, the sudden waves of nausea every morning. The truth hit her one weekend morning when she woke up with a twisted stomach and an overwhelming sense of unease. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her skin was paler, and her eyes looked tired. And then a thought flashed in her mind. It couldn't be. Charlie tried to dismiss the thought, but her mind wouldn't calm down. She hurried out of the apartment, heading to the nearest pharmacy. The anxiety gripped her as she bought a pregnancy test, her hand trembling slightly as she paid. Back home, she locked herself in the bathroom, taking a deep breath before opening the small box in her hands. The waiting time felt unbearably long. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, her heart pounding so loudly she could feel every beat. Then she looked down. 2 red lines. Her world seemed to come to a halt. She blinked, hoping she had seen it wrong, but the result didn't change. She was pregnant. Charlie sat motionless on the bed, the test still in her hands. Her mind was blank, a rush of thoughts flooding her all at once. She had never imagined becoming a mother at this point in her life. She had never imagined that Lucas Vance would be the father of her child. Taking a deep breath, she tried to sort through her thoughts. Should she tell him? Part of her wanted to inform him. After all, this was his child too. But then she remembered how he had ignored her after that night. She recalled the coldness in his eyes when he said it had all been a mistake. If she told him, how would he react? She couldn't bear being rejected by him again. She couldn't allow this child to become a burden or a responsibility that Lucas didn't want. After a sleepless night of contemplation, she made a decision. She would leave. The next morning, Charlie wrote her resignation letter. She spent the entire day tying up loose ends, handing over her tasks to her subordinates, and finally walked into Lucas's office to inform him of her decision. He was standing by the window as usual, his eyes focused on the vast New York sky. When she knocked, he turned, his sharp gaze sweeping over her. What is it? His voice was low yet emotionless. Charlie took a deep breath, then placed the letter on his desk. I'm resigning. A brief silence filled the room. Lucas stared at the paper before him, not immediately touching it. Then he looked up, his cold blue eyes studying her. Why? Charlie had prepared her answer. I want to find a new direction. It's time for a change. Lucas raised an eyebrow as though he didn't believe such a simple reason. Charlie, he said slowly. You've worked here for 3 years. You're one of the best assistants I've ever had. And now suddenly, you want to leave without any real reason? She held his gaze firmly, not letting any hesitation show. Yes, that's right. Lucas was silent for a few seconds. Then he picked up the letter, flipped through it before placing it back on the desk. Do I need to try and convince you to stay? Charlie shook her head. No, you don't. Once again, he studied her carefully. Charlie could feel the scrutiny in his gaze, as though he was trying to read her thoughts. But in the end, he didn't say anything more. Fine, he signed the letter. 2 weeks from now will be your last working day. Charlie nodded, then turned to leave the room. She had expected something, maybe a little surprise from him, or at least a more personal question. But Lucas didn't try to stop her. Perhaps that proved she had made the right decision. 2 weeks later, Charlie left the company without looking back. She moved to another city, one where no one knew who she was, a place where she could start fresh, free from the weight of old memories. She found a new job, one in a quieter, less demanding environment, and most importantly, one where she could focus on her child without the disturbances of her past. The first few days were difficult. She still felt weighed down, still hadn't fully managed to forget what had happened. But every time she placed her hand on her belly, she knew she wasn't alone. She had a little life growing inside her. And from this moment on, she would do everything in her power to protect this child, even if it meant walking alone. Fate's push. 7 months had passed since Charlie left New York. Her life had become more stable, though it had been a struggle in the early days. She found a job at a small but reputable financial firm where she was treated as a valued employee with opportunities for career growth. The peaceful days at work passed by, filled with endless financial calculations, numbers, and reports always waiting for her to finish. Over the months, Charlie slowly learned to live with herself. She took care of her body, spent time exercising, reading, and occasionally participated in outdoor activities to keep her spirits high. Her baby grew bigger with each passing day, and every time she felt the gentle kicks from inside her, her heart swelled with joy. However, despite her best efforts to immerse herself in work and her new life, the quiet moments in her mind could not erase the image of Lucas. He still appeared in her dreams, in her thoughts, popping up unexpectedly whenever she saw a man with even the slightest resemblance to him. Though she tried her hardest to forget him, the memory of that night and the coldness he had shown after they were together remained a dull ache deep within her. Charlie didn't regret her decision. Leaving had been the right thing to do, at least for her, because she had chosen the safer path for her child. And no matter what, she knew Lucas didn't care about her. One morning, like any other, she had just arrived at the office and opened her computer when she received an unexpected notification from the HR department. The company was being acquired. Charlie read the news several times, trying to grasp the situation. This was no small announcement. It didn't just affect the company, but also every single employee. The company that had bought them out was a large financial conglomerate named Vance Enterprises. Charlie immediately recognized the name. She had never forgotten it, for it was always tied to one person she had known and tried to forget: Lucas Vance. Her heart suddenly began to race. She couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of encountering him again. Even though it had been 7 months, she still hadn't completely escaped his shadow. She bit her lip, resolving not to let her emotions take over. This couldn't be a coincidence. There was no way Lucas would recognize her. The entire day, Charlie struggled to focus on her work. Every word, every number seemed to blur before her eyes. Her mind only kept circling back to one question. Did he know she was pregnant? Would he be able to find her? The next day in the new office, the tension was palpable. Everyone had received a notice about an important meeting that afternoon, and they all knew who would be in charge: Lucas Vance, the founder of Vance Enterprises. Charlie had prepared herself for this moment, but when he stepped into the meeting room, her heart clenched. It was undeniable. He still had that effect on her, even after 7 months. Lucas still stood tall, aloof and cold, with his sharp gaze unchanged. But there was something different about him, or maybe it was her that had changed, because she no longer felt the same overwhelming fear when looking at him as she had before. He walked up to the podium, surveying the employees before his eyes suddenly locked onto Charlie's. In that moment, it felt as if time stopped. Though he didn't seem surprised, Charlie could clearly see the change in him. He looked at her, not with the same coldness from before, but with a questioning, even attentive gaze. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, as though everything paused in that instant. Despite her best efforts to look away, Charlie couldn't escape his gaze, his deep green eyes intense and filled with unspoken emotions. She lifted her chin, trying to maintain her composure. But inside, panic surged like a rising tide, powerful and unavoidable. Did he know, she wondered? Did he know what was going on inside me? After the meeting, when everyone had left, only two people remained in the room, Charlie and Lucas. She stood there, trying not to let the chaos of emotions overtake her. The air felt heavier than ever. Lucas moved toward her slowly, deliberately, as if not wanting to disturb the silence, but his gaze never left her. Each step closer seemed like a strike to her heart. "Charlie," he spoke, but this time his voice was different. Not the usual cold, detached tone, but something that sounded both worried and cautious, as if he was afraid to face the truth. "Why, why are you here?" She couldn't answer immediately, only lowering her gaze, too afraid to meet his eyes. She looked down at the table, feeling like the ground beneath her was collapsing. "I'm still working here, even though you bought the company." Her voice was tired, as if every word carried a pain she couldn't hide. "But I don't understand," Lucas said, his voice rising slightly, as if searching for a reasonable explanation that could bring her closer. "Why didn't you tell me about this? Why didn't you let me know?" His question felt like a slap in the face. Charlie looked up, her eyes shining with tears she couldn't hold back. She stared into Lucas's green eyes filled with confusion, an incomprehensible look she couldn't explain. But in that moment, all the suppressed emotions inside her erupted. "You didn't care about me," Charlie responded coldly, her voice devoid of emotion, but deep down, it cut through her heart like a blade. "You forgot about me right after that night, right after we woke up. You left without a word of explanation." Lucas fell silent for a moment, as if her words had hit him like a wave. The room fell still. He couldn't believe what she had said, words that he should have spoken long ago. His eyes grew hollow and sad, as if something inside him was breaking. "Charlie, you don't understand," he said, pausing, his lips trembling, as if he wanted to say something he had never dared to before. He looked at her slowly, and this time, she didn't see the coldness in his eyes. Instead, there was a deep sorrow, as if he was tormented by memories he couldn't escape. "I've liked you for a long time, but I was afraid. I was afraid I would lose you, like I lost my wife." His words were a shock, leaving Charlie speechless. She stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief, but she couldn't let herself soften. What did his words even mean when he had abandoned her, when she needed him most? She couldn't believe empty words. She couldn't overlook everything just because he showed some feelings now. "So why did you leave me?" Charlie's voice was cold, pained, yet resolute. "Why didn't you care about me even when I needed you?" They stood there in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Lucas sighed, a weary exhale, full of torment. He stepped closer to her, without speaking, only getting closer, with a quiet resolve, as if he wanted to correct all his past mistakes. His voice was softer, filled with determination. "I was wrong, Charlie. I can't change the past, but I can do something about the future." Charlie couldn't hold it in any longer. She looked him straight in the eye, her gaze filled with unshed tears, but it was also strong, unyielding. "I know you don't care about me, and I don't need you to take responsibility." She took a deep breath, telling herself she had to be stronger. "You don't have any obligation to do that." These words were hard to say, but she knew they were the only thing she could do. She wouldn't allow herself to be weak anymore. "I chose this path for myself, and I will continue down it alone." The last words she spoke were filled with determination, with an unshakable resolve. She turned and quickly left the room, not giving him a chance to say anything more. She couldn't bear the inner conflict any longer. No matter what he said, no matter how sincere he seemed, it was too late. She couldn't love him again, couldn't trust him again. But as she looked down at her belly, where their child was growing each day, She knew that this destiny could not be avoided. A part of her, no matter how hard she tried to hide it, would always carry Lucas, no matter how much pain it caused her. The late confession. After the tense meeting in the conference room that day, Lucas couldn't stop thinking about Charlie. In the past, every time he saw her, he felt a deep inner turmoil, as if every step she took caused a wound in him to bleed again. What he had never dared to face was the feeling of loss, and the worst part was that he himself had caused that pain. He feared that she might be the next one to suffer at his hands. Though he loved her, he would rather keep her away from him than have her close, only to end up causing her more hurt. But today, when he saw Charlie standing before him, her eyes cold and full of pain, he knew he couldn't remain silent any longer. He couldn't let her slip away again. He couldn't live with this feeling, nor could he continue to live in the haunting memories of what had been. Lucas made up his mind to meet Charlie. He didn't want to lose her again, nor did he want to repeat the mistakes he had made in the past. He knew that, to protect his love, he had to face the truths he had hidden deep inside for so many years. He had to speak the words he had never dared to share with anyone, even himself. When Lucas stood before Charlie's door, his heart raced as if each beat was a blow to his chest. He took a deep breath, telling himself that it was time to face the truth, no matter how difficult. He knocked on the door. "Come in." A cold response came from inside. He entered, and as his gaze met hers, something in his chest tightened. She didn't say anything, just stared at him, her eyes cold and distant, yet not filled with anger, but with silence full of pain, as if she were waiting for him to explain himself. "Charlie, I need to talk to you," Lucas began, his voice gentle but betraying his nervousness. He stepped closer but didn't approach too near, as if afraid that any further step would cause everything to shatter. "Can you give me a few minutes?" Charlie looked up, silent, waiting for him to continue. The air was thick with silence, heavy with the pain he carried within. Lucas took a deep breath, his heart racing as though it might burst, but he couldn't turn back. "I can't live with this feeling anymore. I was wrong, wrong from the very beginning. That night I had no reason to treat you the way I did, and I regret it deeply." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I've liked you for a long time, Charlie. I can't deny that." His words caused Charlie's heart to tighten. She looked at him, her gaze still cold, but no longer with anger. Lucas felt his breath catch, realizing that he had finally said the words he had held back for so long. And when he saw her eyes, he knew that this was the only thing he needed to do. I know I don't have the right to ask you to forgive me," Lucas said, his voice choked, as though all the emotions he had bottled up for years were pouring out. "But I can't let things stay this way. I love you, Charlie." His voice lowered, as if each word he spoke carried the weight of all the fears he had never dared to face. Charlie looked at him, unsure of how to respond. She knew Lucas was a man who rarely opened his heart, but she never imagined he would confess his feelings like this. Charlie took a deep breath before speaking. "Why didn't you say this earlier? Why wait until everything was too late?" Lucas lowered his head, feeling as though the weight of all his life's burdens had fallen on his shoulders. I was afraid," he admitted, his voice dropping, as if each word was pulling him deeper into a pit of despair. "I was afraid to love someone. I was afraid of causing pain, afraid of losing someone I loved, like I lost my wife." At this point, he couldn't hold back anymore, and his pain burst out. "Do you know, Charlie? She was attacked. A business rival who hated me set a trap for her. Before she died, she called me, begging me to come save her, but I arrived too late. I couldn't save her. I couldn't save her. If she hadn't been my wife, she wouldn't have died. She wouldn't have been hurt." Lucas fell silent, his eyes darkening, as though he was sinking into his worst nightmare. "I can't love anyone anymore, Charlie. I can't allow myself to love and lose someone I care about. The guilt, the pain, it has weighed on me for years." Charlie stared at him, a mix of shock and compassion in her gaze. She had never imagined Lucas would have such a painful past, a loss so immense that it kept him from opening his heart to anyone. She had always seen him as strong, cold, unshakable. someone no one could hurt. But now as she listened to him talk about his late wife and the irreversible loss, she realized he was just a man with wounds that couldn't heal. I can't love anyone anymore. I'm afraid because of me they will be hurt. I will lose someone I love again. Lucas continued, his voice full of despair, as if he was exhausted from the internal struggle. But when I met you, when you came into my life, I loved you, but I didn't dare say it because I feared you'd be hurt again. And that night, I lost control. We almost came together, but I left because of my fear. And then yesterday when I saw you again, I realized that not saying it was also hurting you, and I can't forgive myself for that. Charlie felt a deep ache in her heart. No matter how sincere his words were, the pain inside her wouldn't vanish so easily. She listened, but still there was a distance between them that couldn't be erased immediately. I just want things to go back to normal. I just want my child and I to live in peace. You don't have to take responsibility for this, Charlie said, her voice cold but resolute. Lucas looked at her, his eyes no longer cold, but full of regret and longing. Charlie, I don't want you to think I came here just because of responsibility. I want to take care of you. I love you, and I want to do everything to make up for my mistakes. We can start again? Together. Charlie felt a deep internal conflict. What Lucas said wasn't empty words. He looked at her with eyes full of pain and hope. But perhaps what she feared the most was allowing her emotions to take over once again, only to be hurt in the end. You can't expect me to forgive you right away, Charlie replied, her voice softer now. But I can't deny that I've felt your feelings. And maybe I need some time to think. Lucas nodded, fully aware that he couldn't rush her into accepting him. He had spent too much time confronting his own fears, and now he understood that the most important thing was to show Charlie that he was serious about his intentions. You need time, I understand, but I will wait. I will do everything I can to prove my feelings, Lucas said, his voice firm but filled with hope. Charlie looked at him for a moment, then finally nodded slightly. All right, I will think about it. After that conversation, things between them were no longer as tense as before. Although they couldn't yet call it peace, perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter, where they would both move past the past and find love and sincerity. And as Lucas left, the room remained silent, but in Charlie's heart, things had begun to change. She could feel Lucas's care for her, but she also knew that not everything could be easily healed. But at least she could open her heart a little more, to see if love could return after all the pain. A new step. Life together began. Although they both had a past filled with turbulence, this was the first time they truly shared a home, experiencing everyday moments, being close, and listening to each other. But as expected, things weren't always smooth. Just a few days after deciding to return to Lucas, Charlie realized that their life together wouldn't be as easy as she had imagined. In the early days, even though Lucas tried to take care of her, there were still many barriers that hadn't been broken down. She couldn't forget the months they had spent apart, when they were distant and cold toward each other. Every time she looked into his eyes, she still saw traces of doubt, a lingering fear that hadn't fully disappeared. Lucas, though deeply in love with her, couldn't hide the tension in even the smallest situations. The cold, distant shell he had worn for so long had become a part of him, and now, as he tried to change, he sometimes found himself unsure of what to do. His awkwardness in expressing his feelings made everything more difficult. One afternoon, as the rain poured heavily outside, Charlie sat in the living room, gazing out the window with a hot cup of tea in her hand. She had grown accustomed to spending time alone, reflecting on everything. Meanwhile, Lucas was in the kitchen, trying to cook a meal for her. The whole kitchen was filled with the delicious scent of food, but he seemed clumsy. She could hear the clinking of pots and the occasional sigh from him. Charlie smiled slightly and walked into the kitchen, looking at Lucas. Can I help you? Lucas turned around, his expression filled with concern. I wanted to make dinner for you, but I guess I'm not as good as you thought. Charlie stepped closer, gently taking the spoon from his hand and began stirring the soup. You're doing fine. Thank you, she said, looking at him with a warm gaze, much gentler than before. Lucas looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude but also a bit of confusion. He wasn't used to showing affection this way, But each time she spoke softly, his heart seemed to flutter more intensely than ever. Still, not every attempt he made at showing care was successful. One evening after dinner, Lucas decided to bring Charlie a bouquet of flowers. He knew she liked roses, but not being the type to give gifts often, he felt awkward standing at the door with the bouquet in his hand. "Charlie, these are for you," Lucas said, his voice tinged with shyness. Charlie looked at him, then at the bouquet in his hands. "You bought flowers for me?" She couldn't hide her surprise. She hadn't expected that Lucas, the man who was always reserved and cold in business, could do such warm gestures. "Yes," Lucas replied, still maintaining his serious expression, but his eyes revealed deep care. "I just wanted you to feel special." Charlie took the bouquet, feeling the sincerity behind his gesture. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm, a stark contrast to how she had spoken to him before. That was just one of countless moments when Lucas tried to prove his feelings. He began doing things he had never done before, buying small gifts, cooking meals himself, and helping her feel more comfortable through the difficult months of pregnancy. Even on late nights when Charlie was exhausted and couldn't sleep, he would sit beside her, gently rubbing her back, talking about simple things but showing his concern. They went to doctor's appointments together, bought baby clothes, and learned about baby care. Bit by bit, the wounds in Charlie's heart began to heal. Though she still couldn't forget the hurts of the past, Lucas's small acts of kindness slowly changed how she viewed him. She started to feel his genuine care, no longer just words but real actions. And in those moments, she realized that Lucas was no longer the cold man he used to be. One morning, as they sat together for breakfast, Lucas asked a question Charlie hadn't expected. "How do you feel? Is everything okay?" Charlie looked at him, no longer with the skepticism or tension she had before. "I feel better," she replied, then smiled. "Thank you, Lucas." Lucas was silent for a moment, his eyes locking with hers. "I just want you to be happy, Charlie, and I'll do anything to protect you and our child." Those words made her heart tighten. For the first time in a long while, she felt that Lucas was not just a cold man, but someone who could love and care for her. He had changed, and she had begun to change how she saw him as well. She was no longer the woman standing on the outside, watching his life from a distance. Now she was a part of his world. And from those moments on, Charlie began to feel more clearly the love she had for Lucas. Although she couldn't fully open her heart to him yet, she knew that at least he had entered her life once again, and this time she wasn't ready to let him go. The tragedy, the day Charlie had been waiting for, finally arrived. The day that both she and Lucas had been mentally preparing for. In the days leading up to it, Charlie had begun to feel the first signs of labor pains, a clear indication that the time for her baby was drawing near. But no one could truly be prepared for the tragedy that fate had already written. At this moment, Lucas stood outside the operating room, clutching his phone tightly in his hand. Though he tried to stay calm, the worry and fear in his eyes were impossible to hide. This sense of helplessness was something he hadn't felt since his wife passed away. The feeling of loss, the pain of watching someone he loved slip away with no way to help, had haunted him for many years. Now here he was, standing in front of the operating room door, terrified that Charlie might be the second person he lost. She was the one he had loved for so long, but because he was so afraid of losing those he cared about, he had always kept his distance, always stepped back. But in this moment, faced with the fear of losing her, he realized that he couldn't live without Charlie. Even if he had to confront all the pain, he wouldn't let her slip out of his life again. Meanwhile, inside the operating room, doctors and nurses were working urgently, doing everything they could to protect both mother and child. Charlie lay on the operating table, her eyes tightly shut, her face pale from exhaustion and pain. The rapid contractions were draining her strength. Every time she tried to open her eyes, all she could see were beads of sweat rolling down her forehead, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The heartbeat of the baby inside her began to fade. She thought back to all the moments she had spent with Lucas, the times he had cared for her, loved her, and treated her with such tenderness. She could feel the warmth of his heart every time he was near. But now all she wanted was to be safe, to see his eyes again. She wasn't afraid of dying, but she was terrified that she wouldn't be able to see her child grow up. She feared that Lucas would have to live alone, enduring the same pain he had once suffered. Outside the operating room, Lucas could not stop pacing. Each step felt heavy, as though he was carrying a massive weight that he couldn't put down. His vision blurred, no longer able to focus on the people around him, his entire attention fixed on the closed door of the operating room, as if that door held the key to everything. He glanced at the watch on his wrist, but he couldn't feel the passage of time. Each second, each minute dragged on endlessly, like an eternity. The hospital seemed to sink into silence, with only the sound of his labored breaths and the hurried footsteps of nurses passing by. Everything around him faded, except for the pounding of his own heart. There were no comforting words, no empathetic glances, only the tension, anxiety, and a pain that words could never convey. The fear, the suffocating feeling, the deep ache, all coiled tightly around his heart. In his mind, the image of that night came rushing back, the night his wife passed away. The helplessness he felt watching the one person he loved most in the world slowly slip away, unable to do anything to save her. That nightmare, though long in the past, still haunted him every night. He had promised himself never to face the scene again, but now everything felt like it was happening again, only this time, the woman he loved wasn't his late wife, but Charlie. He couldn't stop the fear, couldn't control the overwhelming sense of confusion rising inside him. Every step he took down the hallway seemed longer, weighing him down. He couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, couldn't stop imagining the worst possible outcomes for Charlie. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think anymore. Suddenly he stopped, his hand clutching the armrest of a nearby chair as his entire body trembled. He didn't know what he was doing anymore. He just knew he couldn't stay still here, but neither could he walk into the operating room. There was nothing to do except wait. A sudden numbness flooded through him. Lucas, who had always been strong and stoic, for the first time in his life felt completely powerless. He was no longer the determined CEO, no longer the man who could control every situation. All that remained was an infinite fear. Fear of losing Charlie, fear of not being able to save her, just as he hadn't been able to save his wife. His hand gripped so tightly that his knuckles turned white, but he felt nothing, only the numbness creeping through his body. Every emotion, every thought, spun in a never-ending spiral with no way out. "Please keep her safe," Lucas whispered, but this time no one was around to hear his prayer. "Please don't take this woman from me. I can't lose her. I can't bear it again." His voice cracked, as though the weight of these words was too heavy to escape. He wasn't someone who believed in divine intervention or fate, but in that moment, all he could do was cling to something greater than himself, to an invisible force that might save her. He had never prayed before, but now, in this moment, he needed it more than ever. He needed a miracle, a reason to hope that Charlie would be okay, that she wouldn't have to suffer what his wife had gone through. With every passing second, his fear grew, as though the darkness was overtaking his mind, his heart. He couldn't imagine what life would be like without her by his side, with their child. But whether his prayer was answered or not, Lucas knew there was nothing he could do but continue waiting. Waiting for a miracle, waiting for life to return. Then suddenly the operating room door opened, and a doctor stepped out, his eyes betraying a sense of worry. Lucas rushed forward, unable to hold back his urgency, asking rapidly, "Doctor, how is she? Is she okay?" The doctor paused for a moment, then sighed and spoke softly but with a hopeful tone. "She made it through the surgery. Both mother and baby are stable. The baby is healthy, and she's being monitored post-surgery. We'll keep watching her, but everything looks very good right now." Hearing those words, Lucas felt as if he had just woken from a nightmare. Cold sweat rolled down his face, and his hands shook as he let out a sigh of relief. His eyes were red-rimmed, but these weren't tears of sorrow. These were tears of joy. Finally, he didn't have to face his greatest fear, the fear of losing her, the fear of experiencing the loss that had haunted him for so long. "Thank you, doctor," Lucas choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." The doctor nodded, offering a gentle smile at the visible worry and love Lucas held for Charlie. Congratulations. We'll let you know when she wakes up. Lucas stood waiting outside the recovery room, his eyes never leaving the door. Each passing second seemed to stretch endlessly, but finally the door to the room opened, and a nurse stepped out, looking at Lucas with a soft smile. "She's awake and stable," the nurse announced. "You can go in and see her." Unable to hold back, Lucas quickly stepped into the room. Charlie lay there still tired, but her face had lost its pallor. Her eyes fluttered open and met his, filled with a look of relief. She offered him a weak smile, but in her gaze there was gratitude and tenderness that he hadn't felt from her in a long time. Lucas sat down beside her bed, gripping her hand tightly. His eyes shone with happiness, love, and unconditional protection. "I'm here, Charlie. You don't have to worry anymore. I'll never let you go again." She looked at him, her breathing steadier now. Her lips moved slightly, but she still couldn't speak. Yet in her heart, his words reached every corner of her soul, soothing the fears and worries that had plagued her. "I won't go anywhere," she whispered, finally finding her voice again. Lucas leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers, his eyes closing as his heart swelled with a peace he hadn't known for many years. "We made it through, Charlie, and I'll never let go of you." A small family. The soft morning light filtered through the window, creating a warm atmosphere in the hospital room. A strange sense of peace settled in, as if time had paused to allow everything around them to settle. Lucas's heart raced as he looked at his son for the first time. This tiny life he had waited for, a precious gift born from the love between him and Charlie. The baby was in the hands of the doctor and nurse who had cared for him throughout the ordeal. Lucas stood nearby, his heart ready to leap out of his chest, filled with both worry and overwhelming joy. His son, the child he only discovered existed when Charlie was in danger, was now here, and seeing this tiny being in the doctor's hands made it all feel real. "Can I hold him?" Lucas asked, his voice warm but trembling. This was a new experience for him, a part of life he hadn't dared to dream about before. The nurse smiled and handed the baby to him. Lucas gently took the child into his arms, his hands shaking slightly as he felt the softness of the baby's small body. He gazed into his son's innocent eyes, so pure and adorably tiny. A flood of emotions filled him, emotions he had never known before. He cradled his son in his arms, looking at the child as though he could see their entire future unfolding. Even though the baby was so small, Lucas could already imagine the moments ahead, watching his son grow, creating beautiful memories with Charlie. The love that rose within him was as warm and powerful as a fire in his chest, a feeling more intense than anything he had ever felt before. "Your daddy's here, little one," Lucas whispered, his eyes glistening with happy tears. "I'll protect you and your mommy forever." Charlie, although still groggy from the anesthesia, could feel the warmth in the room. She slowly opened her eyes, her first sensation being a numbness from the medication. But as soon as she saw what was in front of her, her heart skipped a beat. Lucas was holding their son, gazing at him with an expression of love and tenderness, something Charlie had never seen from him before. Lucas had always been cold, distant, but now he was a different man, a devoted father, loving his child with all his heart. Every movement he made with the baby, every word he spoke to him, made Charlie's heart ache with emotion. Charlie tried to sit up, her eyes still foggy with sleep, but the sight of Lucas and their son made all her worries and fatigue disappear. She smiled weakly, a soft, gentle smile, and looked at him. "You, you're holding him." Her voice was faint but filled with emotion. Lucas turned to her, his eyes brimming with tears. But these weren't tears of pain or loss. He walked toward her, gently sat down on the bed, and placed their son in her arms. "This is our son, Charlie," he whispered. "Our son, all three of us." Charlie looked at her baby. In that moment, she felt as though she had found everything she had ever needed. She wasn't facing life alone anymore. She and Lucas, after all they had been through, finally had a family, a child who would be the living proof of the love they had fought for. She gently cradled her son, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Our baby," she repeated softly, feeling every breath of the child in her arms, each little cry like a lullaby in her soul. Lucas looked at her, unable to speak, but only able to hold her hand tightly. He didn't need to say anything more because everything he wanted to say was reflected in his eyes and his actions. He would do anything to protect her, to protect their child, to ensure their little family would always be happy and at peace. "I swear, Charlie," Lucas finally spoke, his voice warm but firm, "I will never let you be alone again. I will protect you and our child for the rest of my life. Nothing will tear us apart. I will be a good father, a good husband, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure our family's happy." Charlie looked at him, her eyes filled with trust and emotion. She didn't need any more promises, because in Lucas's eyes, she could see the love and devotion he had for her and their child. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew that they would face them together. She no longer had to worry about what the future would bring. She knew that, no matter what, they would get through everything together. She held Lucas's hand, pressing his palm to hers. "We will get through it all, Lucas. We'll build a happy little family." Lucas lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead before looking at their son in her arms. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. He would do everything in his power to keep their family strong, to keep the love that burned between them always shining bright. This little family, no matter the obstacles, would always be the safest place for them to return to. The sweet proposal. One spring evening, the soft golden light bathed their villa. On the large dining table, flickering candles created a romantic ambiance. A special dinner was being prepared, and everything was meticulously arranged by Lucas, from each dish to the surrounding atmosphere. Everything was perfect, but there was only one thing he needed: Charlie's presence. Lucas stood in the kitchen, skillfully preparing her favorite dish. Despite being a man of business, a cold and influential CEO when it came to Charlie, he became someone else. A husband, a father, and above all, a man wanting to give her everything beautiful in life. He knew from the moment she entered his life, everything had changed. She was the light that had brought color to his world, the one who gave him a reason to keep living after all the pain and loss. She was the most precious thing he had, and today he decided he wouldn't wait any longer. He would propose to her, asking her to be his forever. Charlie sat on the sofa in the living room, gazing out of the window where the sunset had begun to fade. She smiled as she watched Lucas busy in the kitchen. A sense of peace filled her. It was as if everything she had ever wished for was now right in front of her. They had gone through so much, but now their love had blossomed and she was no longer afraid. The delicious smells from the kitchen made her stomach growl. A romantic dinner, something she had never imagined with Lucas, the man who had always been consumed by work and his career. But now he had changed, and their love had matured over time. Charlie stood up and walked into the kitchen. When she entered, she saw Lucas decorating the dining table with candles and fresh flowers. His eyes didn't look up, but she could feel the concentration and love he put into every detail. "What are you doing?" Charlie asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. Lucas turned to her, looking at her with warm eyes. "Everything is ready. There's just one more thing. You." He smiled and walked toward her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. Charlie felt the warmth of his touch, and in that moment, she knew there was nothing that could ever pull her away from him. All her worries, all the fears from before, had vanished, replaced by a strong and unwavering love. A little while later, they sat at the table, enjoying the delicious dishes Lucas had prepared. The room was filled with warmth and affection. Baby Tom lay peacefully in the cradle nearby. They didn't speak much, but the exchanged glances and tender gestures were all they needed to understand each other. As the dinner neared its end, Lucas set down his wineglass, looking into Charlie's eyes with an intensity she had never seen before. He gently stood up, walked toward her, and knelt down on one knee. "Charlie," his voice was hoarse but full of emotion, "you brought light back into my life. Before I met you, I was so tired of everything. But you changed all that. You showed me that love still exists, that life can be colorful and meaningful. I can't imagine my life without you." A lump formed in Charlie's throat as she gazed into Lucas's eyes. These weren't just empty words or promises. These were the heartfelt words of a man who had endured so much pain and loss, yet had finally found peace in love. "Charlie, will you marry me?" Lucas looked up, his eyes filled with sincerity and hope. For a long moment, Charlie didn't speak, only gazing at him with deep emotion. She knew this was the most important moment of her life. A proposal from Lucas, the man she had loved for so long, even if at first she hadn't dared to admit it. But now she knew her heart. She smiled, tears of happiness rolling down her cheeks. "You've given me everything I need," she whispered. "And I love you, Lucas. I have for a long time. I say yes." Lucas could no longer hold back his emotions. He stood up, pulled her into his arms and kissed her forehead gently, full of love. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me. I will never disappoint you." It was a night full of warmth, not just a romantic dinner, but also a promise of forever. They were beginning a new journey, not as two strangers, but as two people who loved each other, a small family now bound together to face everything ahead. A few weeks later, a small wedding was held, simple and intimate. No extravagant parties, no fanfare. Lucas and Charlie's wedding was a testament to true love, one that had weathered every challenge, and now they would build a new life together, a life full of happiness and love. In their vows, there was no perfection, only truth and determination. They would stay together forever, not because of a proposal, but because of the love and commitment they had built long ago. Forever happiness. Lucas and Charlie's new life began with the simplest things, yet they were filled with deep meaning. After a warm and emotional wedding, they had officially become a family. A small family, but one full of love, care, and devotion for each other. Every day for them was a new journey, with moments of happiness and at times small challenges. Lucas was no longer the cold CEO people had known, the one always immersed in work, the one who never let emotions influence his decisions. Now he was a devoted husband, a loving father, and a man who always wanted to bring the best to his wife and child. Every morning, Lucas woke up earlier to prepare breakfast for the family. He knew that in the past, work had made him miss many important moments in life. But since Charlie and their child entered his world, he realized that there were things far more precious than contracts or numbers on a ledger. It was family, the moments spent together, the joy of seeing his wife smile and watching his son play in his arms. One morning, just like any other, the warm sunlight filtered through the window, waking the little family. Charlie awoke in Lucas's arms, feeling the warmth of his body, and a sense of absolute peace enveloped her. She reached out, gently stroking his hair, saying nothing, just feeling his every breath, every warmth he gave her. After months of fear and struggling with past pains, she had found peace in her heart, right here, in the family she had chosen. Lucas woke up and turned to look at his wife. Looking at her, he felt an overwhelming happiness fill his heart. He no longer had to battle the fear of loss, no longer had to fight against feelings of loneliness. He had her, he had their child, he had a real family. Nothing was more important than that. "Good morning," Lucas whispered, kissing Charlie's forehead. "Good morning," she smiled, her eyes filled with love as she looked at him. They didn't say much more, simply lying in each other's arms for a long moment. When their little son's tiny voice broke the silence, greeting them with innocent sounds, Lucas laughed heartily and immediately sat up. "I'll go check if he's awake," Lucas said, his eyes sparkling with eagerness. Charlie smiled softly and nodded, saying nothing more. She knew how much Lucas loved their son, and that love always made her heart warm. Lucas walked out of the room and went into the nursery, where their baby boy was lying in the crib, looking around with curious eyes. Seeing his son, Lucas felt an indescribable happiness. All the hardships, all the challenges he had faced seemed to vanish. Being a father, taking care of his child, was the greatest thing he had ever hoped for. He gently picked up the baby, soothing him with soft, loving words. Charlie followed behind, standing in the doorway, watching the scene. She saw Lucas, the man she had once thought would never change, pouring all his love into their child, into their family. She watched them play, saw his hands gently cradling their son, and suddenly she felt a profound sense of calm wrap around her. "I can't believe we've been through all those challenges," Charlie whispered, walking up to Lucas, watching the father and son playing joyfully. Lucas looked up, his gaze softer than ever. I just want you to know that I will always be here, always beside you and our son. I never want to miss these moments. Charlie smiled, her eyes full of love. You've changed so much, Lucas. I'm so proud of you. For you, for this family, I will never go back to the person I used to be, Lucas said, lifting their son a little higher, making the baby giggle. Thank you for everything, Charlie replied, her eyes brimming with tears. She couldn't believe how beautiful their life had become. From the cold, stern man he used to be, Lucas had transformed into a perfect husband and father. She needed nothing more. That day, their little family spent time together, enjoying simple but meaningful moments of happiness. Lucas and Charlie walked through the garden, playing with their son, talking about the future and the plans they would make together. No matter how many challenges life had ahead, they knew that as long as they had each other, they would overcome anything. That evening, after their son had fallen into a peaceful sleep, they sat together, hand in hand, looking out the window. The twinkling stars in the night sky seemed to bear witness to their promise. A life no longer filled with fear, no longer lonely, but only love. I love you, Charlie, Lucas whispered. I love you too, Lucas, she replied, gently resting her head on his shoulder. Their life had officially turned a new page, a page of peace, of happy moments, and deep love. They had found each other, and they would never lose each other again. Happiness was not a destination, but the journey they walked together. And for Lucas and Charlie, this journey was just beginning. Fear and pain from the past can cause people to miss important opportunities in life, especially in love. Sometimes the fear of loss can make us cold, distant, and unwilling to open our hearts. However, sincerity and courage in facing pain is the only way to heal and create new opportunities. Sometimes love is about acceptance and the willingness to change in order to protect the most important things in life. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.